Okay. So so there's a lot that is still being done, but the issue is that the responsibilities for public health sector are to collect data and looking at emerging health problems and existing health problems, generate policy, recommendations for policy, and then basically sort of QA the various uh, programs that are in place. So there's 10 essential responsibilities in this that are put into this PowerPoint here. Monitoring the health status. Pardon? I am on slide number 29. Yeah. Okay. To diagnose and investigate problems and hazards, educate, to work with communities to put together partnerships to solve some of these problems, and to develop policies and plans to support all the efforts that are being done, enforce laws and regulations that are supposed to be protecting our health and so forth, to provide a way to link necessary services with people, to provide a competent workforce. That's an interesting kind of responsibility. To evaluate the effectiveness and quality of these personal and population-based health services, and to look for research for new ways to approach health problems. That's a lot. And it's a lot to do on a minimal budget. And therefore it hasn't happened as well. There are a lot of people who work in public health one way or another. They work in public clinics. Yeah. Yeah. Work in these public health clinics. They work hard. They work for their patients. They're underpaid and overworked. But it's the kind of work that they want to do, and it's needed. So we have lots and lots of problems. The public and private medicine have an interesting relationship. They should be complementary. Your private medical system is the basis for our medical care in this country. And as long as that's the basis, then that's what we work with. So what happens with the public health is they provide a lot of information. For one, the CDC produces something called the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report, which is basically what diseases are killing people where in this country. And it's what a lot of doctors will use, especially when we have a bad, season, something's going around, a lot of people are getting sick. The CDC will track this, and they will provide aid in identifying what's out there and what are the best treatments. And so that's why the doctor and physicians receive that MMWR every week, and they generally will look and see what's going on in their area. And they also can, if they have someone who has gotten sick and they find out that they've been visiting their family in Augusta for the last week, and they've come back and they're sick, he can find out what's been going on in Augusta and make recommendations for treatment based on that. So the public health provides a lot of that education and that background information. Plus, the CDC works with the World Health Organization to track and monitor disease around the world. If you've ever played the board game Pandemic, oh, it's an interesting game. It's not your usual board game in that it's a cooperative game. You have a bunch of people that are playing it, and they're given identities. You pick an identity, and you have certain responsibilities and certain abilities as your identity is either, the dispatcher or the medic or the researcher or whatever, to fight for epidemics that are appearing in the world. And you have to work together on this to win. So you either all win or you all lose in this game. It's good. It's a good game because it's not your usual board game where everybody's, I'm out for me and only me. We have to work together if we want to get through this.
How long does the game?
We've played it a number of times. Usually we find that the game will last for 4 people. It'll last about a half an hour. So it's not too bad. Oh God, no. No, Monopoly is just awful. Yeah. Our daughters made a variant. Our daughters made a variant. They would set up a big maze and big, 3-dimensional maze in we had a huge basement. They'd set up a great big maze in it, and they'd set up the game sort of in the middle. And you could, and the game was cutthroat. You could steal, but if you got caught, your penalty was you had to run through the entire maze. And while you were running through the maze, everybody'd be playing real fast to try and get ahead of you. But you could steal from the bank, you could steal from each other, you could do anything. And it was just, that made it at least fun. Yeah, right, yeah. I won't play that game.
No.
But, our daughters did come up with a variant that was at least fun. So we'd hear them in the basement laughing. We'd go down and there'd be one of them running through the maze and the other 3. So it was really fun to watch. But anyway, but that's how the CDC works. It works cooperatively and works with other health agencies around the world. Now, unfortunately, Pandemic is centered just on one organization. But you could say that organization was an amalgam of all the major public health agencies around the world, including WHO and the Pan-African and Southeast Asian organizations that work together. So it works out that is how they work. Their job is to fight and quarantine and contain disease. We saw this with the most recent Ebola outbreak in Africa. And we're going to see it more. And the Zika down in Brazil. Not horrible. Yeah, well, it should. It came from somewhere in South America, near as we can figure. It arose there. And it might have been as far north as the Caribbean and then moved both directions. So it moved into the United States, and it certainly moved into Brazil with just balls of fire, just going like crazy. I haven't heard about that, but I have heard about extremely drug-resistant TB appearing in Los Angeles from people who had been visiting India. Yeah, because India has a major problem. It's all crowded and stuff. So India has a major problem with strains of TB that are not responsive to any drugs. And that a man appeared in Los Angeles with that strain, and it was Panicville. You can imagine. But think about it. You can literally get virtually any place on this planet from any other place on this planet in about 36 hours. And the incubation period for most diseases is longer. So you don't even know you're sick. Right. And then you come home and you've got something that's nasty. If you're lucky, it's nasty and quick, and you get over it. If you're not lucky, it's nasty and you spread it around. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the guys, I was in the shower and I noticed under my skin, crawling up under my skin, y'all shower cover, dad, I got words. His dad was a bother. Like, he wasn't
Yeah.
thinking enough out with it.
Yep.
That's a do this and that, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, we had a friend, our daughter's best friend from her grade school and high school years. When she went to college, she started off as pre-med, and she spent, I want to say 3 months, but it might have been 6 months of her pre-med time in Tanzania, in Africa. And she took anti-malarial meds. She took every vaccination they gave you. She got every tropical disease you can name, every single one. Malaria.
Oh my God.
She had them all.
Malaria.
Yeah.
Walk, eat, talk, everything.
Yeah, he must have had a really bad case. Yeah, that's unusually bad. Well, but malaria still kills about 500,000 kids in Africa a year. So nasty disease. Yeah, my dad was spent World War II in the Pacific, which is malaria, and spent his entire time. He didn't actually get malaria, fortunately, because he was taking the tablets, Atibrant, at the time. And when my wife and I spent 2 years backpacking around the world, we spent quite a bit of our time in the tropics, and we were taking antimalarials the whole time. Yeah, and I mean, good thing. I mean, we'd wake up some mornings and the mosquito netting that we put over our bed would be covered. Yeah, yeah, just be covered with mosquitoes. And so we went through a lot of mosquito repellent. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But Chantel, if you decide to go to Belize, let her know. She said she might just pack a bag and join you. Okay. Public health used to be a part of medical schools because we didn't have the same structure. We didn't have, very limitedly. They don't spend a lot of time. In fact, you're likely to get more public health education in vet school than in medical school. Yeah, we have a friend who the Air Force paid her way through vet school. And then she went here in Colorado Springs and studied large animal medicine. So the Air Force doesn't have a whole lot of large animals. Yeah, well, yeah. So actually, her career in the Air Force was as a public health service officer. Yeah, instead of as an active vet. I remember when we were living on Air Force bases, we always had a vet. We took our dogs to the vet, who was an Air Force officer, usually a captain. And, that's how they did their service when I was a kid. But, I don't know that they even provide that anymore. I mean, they've been cutting their expenses. Yeah. So, but we used to always have a vet on post, and that's where our animals went. So, but yeah, when she had to do that, when Rita had to do that, um, she was a public health officer in Tallahassee at the Air Force Base there, outside of the Air Force Base at Tallahassee, Pensacola, rather. Well, it's one of those in the Florida Panhandle. You know, I know there is one there, and I'm thinking I know there used to be one at Pensacola, but that's also a big Navy base. But I thought there was an airfield there as well. She was there, stationed in the Florida Panhandle. I don't remember. After her father died, we sort of lost track of her. So yeah. We're still in touch with her sisters, and she's now out of the Air Force and in the private world. But the relationship between public and private medicine has been one that has not been really comfortable. A lot of the private medical folks equate it with government bureaucracy. Well, there is some of that, but it's a bureaucracy of a different sort. I mean, it is people that actually, in many cases, are very dedicated to the work they're doing, and the a lot of it is seen as basically giving away your time. Yes, if you work in the public health service as an MD, you don't get a gigantic salary, but you don't suffer either. You're going to have a high GS rating. And so you may not be an 18, but you're probably going to be a 12 to 14, which is going to be a really nice salary for most of us. It's just not what you could make if you had an active specialty practice out in the private sector. It's sort of an invisible part. We don't hear until, the CDC puts out an alert. We don't hear about it, or until the Surgeon General, puts out a smoking report or something like that. You don't hear much about it. And so it doesn't have a lot of, attractiveness in that. So the issue is that public health is sort of the poor stepsister of the medical system. There's the political garbage that goes along with government being involved in healthcare, and this complete ridiculous non-issue of socialized medicine, which isn't what it is at all. There was a lot of resistance to the mandated infectious disease reporting. Government interference, privacy issues, and quite frankly, there aren't any privacy issues because it's reported anonymously anyway. All you do, you don't give patient names. Now, if you can be approached by public health people who will want to interview people to see where diseases are coming from, and there's a public health policy issue there. If we're trying to track disease, sometimes we need to talk to patients, and I would imagine most doctors will get permission from patients to pass the information along, because it is, we're very concerned about HIPAA violations. And just because somebody says, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, doesn't mean that that's what's going on. So, if indeed that's the case, but we have to find out what's going on. took a long time to figure out who patient zero was in the AIDS epidemic. Patient zero was the first reported case.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Patient zero was, after you track it down, this is the place where it originated in this country. And as near as we can tell, it was an airline steward, a gay airline steward, who was on one of the runs from one of the airlines into Western Africa, and who had a relationship with a man, yeah, had a relationship with a man there who had the disease, possibly from eating an infected monkey or possibly from his own sexual activity. We don't know. But, and the idea that it actually came from monkeys first is still, it's a plausible theory. I don't think it's been proven. We do know that there is the simian version of the disease, and we do know that viruses evolve. So, anyway, we do know we can find, so part of public health's job is to track these things back. Where is it coming from? How is it coming into the country? And what are the causes? There was a lot of mystery around AIDS. And a lot of really unbelievable behavior. If you want to read an interesting book about the early days of the AIDS epidemic and the scientific effort to identify the causative agent, because everybody knew that when somebody did that, they were going to get a Nobel Prize. Okay, so this is science politics as well. A book by the name of a reporter by the name of Randy Stilts. He wrote a book called "And the Band Played On," about that. Yeah, they made a movie of it. The movie was reasonably accurate, but like most Hollywood efforts, they took some liberties. But it wasn't, they didn't do a bad job of portraying. I mean, it would have been hard to do a bad job of portraying what went on, because it was a lot of rivalry and a lot of, wanting to be the first, wanting to be the discoverer. It was quite an interesting sort of thing. There is an awful lot of things that go on in the public health that are really trying to work hand in hand with the private sector. Screening programs. People won't pay for screening. If you go in and your insurance won't pay for a screening, are you going to pay for it? Chances are you're going to balk at that unless you have a really personal reason to do so. But the screening program, the screening programs that people have are important, and then they can be referred, or they can take the results back to their doctor for treatment. So we have a lot of things going on. There were a lot of things that happened that were public health related. The emergence of AIDS, the return of tuberculosis. We thought we pretty much dealt with tuberculosis. But it went and basically had a reservoir population of crowded slum areas in almost all parts of the world. We saw it in prison populations here in the United States, in group housing situations. We found that it was coming back. Measles is on the return. Mm-hmm. MMR, yeah, measles, mumps, rubella.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So,
yep, yep,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah. It'll do that. Um, so the so there's a lot of things that have changed. We've got substance abuse problems from the 80s on have just been incredible, and the saddest part is that much of that was caused by our own government. Um, no, well, the whole Iran Contra thing under Reagan,
Yeah.
funded by narcotics trafficking into the United States by the CIA.
What?
Yes, that all came out in hearings in Congress, and nobody ever paid for that activity. Yeah, and that's why we have a drug problem in this country now, a big one. Yeah, we've always had a drug problem. I mean, in the early part of the 20th century, I mean, marijuana was just used
Mhm.
throughout high society.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Opium, marijuana, all those things until they were banned.
Mhm.
Um, we've always had a problem with drugs. But the really serious problem, it's led to much of the publicity about violence and gang violence and everything that's related to drug occurred under Ronald Reagan during the Iran Contra
Mhm.
when they started.
That's why he-
Well, he has his detractors.
Yeah.
But one of the things was that they just didn't care about the consequences of bringing narcotics into the country.
And
Um,
now,
and now we have a mess. Have a mess. So anyway, the a lot of these, a lot of what's happened is that public health is about prevention, but our typical medical approach today is about curing, which means treating symptoms. And that usually means using either high-tech equipment or expensive drugs, as opposed to efforts that will curb the incidence of disease. So public health is really about prevention. And a lot of it has to do with um, we have a large portion of disenfranchised people in our society. They're, minorities, the poor, people who have mental health issues. Um, they're disenfranchised, which really, that's a term that used to mean they don't vote. And in fact, that's what happens. They don't vote, so politicians don't give a rip about it. Really. If you don't vote, why would a politician care what you think? You know? So, we have these people have no one speaking for them. And we all know that if you can prevent people from getting sick, intuitively, it's going to cut the healthcare bill in this nation. Um, so there's a real resistance to that. All you have to do is look at television, look at the commercials on television, look at what's happened to soft drinks. I mean, when I was a kid, soft drinks were a treat, right? Now they seem to be something that everybody thinks is a right. And what used to be a 12-ounce Coke is now a 20-ounce bottle. Yeah, I won't
people
touch
like
diet
3
sodas.
of them a day.
Mhm.
Every
Yeah. And you know what it does? They're supposed to be, supposed to help you lose weight. Guess what happens when you have those artificial sweeteners? It actually stimulates appetite
Mhm.
because your body does one of the functions of sugar is to tell you when you've had enough.
No. Big Mac, double orders of fries.
Yep. I know. I know. I look at it. People, I see people doing that. When I was a bartender, we'd have people, I'll have a rum and Diet Coke. I, I used to have to turn around so they wouldn't see me laughing. So yeah, exactly. This does you a whole lot of good, right? So we have that. Um, the a lot of public health type work is done through voluntary agencies.
Yeah.
We, the part of the problem we have is this tendency that's come about in this nation to offload the costs of various programs onto local agencies that don't have any money. So they end up depending on volunteers. I mean, you go down to the library, we live in Loveland, so we use the Loveland Library a lot. There are a number of people there that are volunteers because the library doesn't have any budget to pay people. Oh,
The
yeah.
library.
Yeah. I think libraries are cool. I'd be fired though because I'd spend all my time reading. Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of those. You go into a hospital, they're dependent on volunteers. My mother-in-law was in Poudre Valley when she broke her hip last summer. And no, she wasn't. She was at McKee in Loveland when she broke her hip. And they had a guy there who was a volunteer, and he met us at the door. Oh, do you need coffee? Do you need water? Do you know where you're going? Here, let me escort you to your room, your mother's room. Blah 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 blah. Very nice man. He volunteers. He sort of invented that position.
Really? Um,
Yeah. 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 These places rely on volunteers because their budgets are are being affected. They just don't have the cash. And there's a lot of places that do this. Hospice volunteers are common. Yeah. Yeah. There are some foundations that support these things. But again, it's like anything else. They're under budgeted and overworked. Okay. So even though there's a lot of tension, even though it's a small chunk, $79 billion is not chump change as far as I'm concerned. But it's a drop in the bucket when you think of it as only 3% of the total, expenditures. So all levels of government, federal, state, local, have substantial roles to play as we're trying to come to grips with the problems of healthcare in this country, and public health is part of the issue. One of the problems is that we do have health departments. I remember when health departments used to be well-stocked clinics. Now they have limited hours. Yeah. Really?
Yeah. And I guess my mom said it was several things to Arkansas. That was one and a half. What was plans on doing when they closed? Yeah.
Yeah, and this is part of the trend. Funding's been reduced. You've got far too much demand than your ability to deliver, to provide. So yeah. Well, you know, what I don't understand is why the businesses haven't said, wait a minute, folks, a healthy population is good for business.
No.
Yeah,
It's like one of the people. There was employers that chose to pay the study versus, allowing the employees to get health insurance.
I
That is
know. And that
cruel.
$2,000 a year
I know
for every
for
employee. And I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense to me either.
Really bothers me.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're not prepared. We're not prepared to deal with the issues. You know, one of the points here is that after the attacks of 9/11, whole bunch of interest was about public health and about preparedness and everything. It's been a bust. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um, even long after the attacks, um, we have no comprehensive national plan or ability to deal with anything. Just look at what panic causes when somebody gets an envelope of powder in the mail. You know, the whole theoretical anthrax thing. Yeah? I hope your feeling is false. Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
if you can remember when I'm sure everybody at one point felt the energy. During that time, for that brief week or whatever, we were united.
Yeah.
We were united.
Yeah.
We were the United States. And slowly we got back to being complacent and I'm better than you, or, and it just, it's sad that it takes tragedy to bring people together. But
Well, it does. The problem is they don't stay.
that's it.
And, you know, this whole, that's one of the reasons that some of the, you know, no matter what you think about what happened in Florida recently, um, you know, the the cynics are saying, well, it'll blow over. Yeah, and this is part of the problem. Um, and it blows over because, you know, it'll happen until somebody finally decides um, to do something about it. What will they decide? Who knows? But nonetheless, um, so lots and lots of efforts are being made, especially under ACA, to actually try to promote public health. But the problem is, you're just not. They're not funding. Um, we really do need to provide um, preventive services. Again, preventive services have been shown repeatedly to be much more cost effective than curative stuff that we do. So as long as that's the case, we're going to be stuck with it. So it really is not going to be. It's going to be interesting to see. Let's see if there's anything else here that really. There's a lot of statistics that are a little outdated because, of course, we've had lots of changes. But we are starting to see a couple of things. One of which is an understanding that that lifestyle is important to consider. There's the whole field of functional medicine really is about lifestyle, better sleep, meditation, exercise, and diet. Okay. Yeah. Ah,
Good.
yeah. Pistachios are good. We eat a lot of them at our house. Good. Yeah. Yeah, no, pistachios are a really good, a good nut to eat. Yeah, we keep a bowl of them on our table all the time. So sure, sure, but it's better to eat. It's better to eat good foods. Yeah, yeah, we're working on the same thing. We're looking at we're um, reducing meat, increasing vegetables in our diet, and we've never been canned vegetable eaters. It's always
Right.
fresh is preferable, but
Yeah.
frozen is a good alternative.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we shop at Costco a lot, so we get these things, and we can get the mega bag and throw it in the freezer and have all sorts of stuff for a long time. And we're looking at lots of soups and stews and things that we can load up with.
I was pretty healthy, but when I got here, I almost became a fanatic. I did not. I stopped eating red meat for some reason. And my nurse, the doctor told me, no, you need your red meat. You need your.
You need the iron. Yeah.
And so I started,
yeah, women should think twice about dropping red meat. Oh, that's good.
I mean, I just
Changed my lifestyle. Yeah, yeah. Yep. I used to say the best weight loss program I ever was involved in was called Basic Training.
I gained 14 pounds.
A lot of people do, but I did. I lost weight. I lost weight.
2 pounds on my middle. I was 102. No, I was 100 pounds even on 2 pounds on my minimum. They said, okay, you got 6 months. Well, eat a lot of bananas and a lot of stuff days, but I also was exercising trying to get rid of it. I did not gain not 1 pound. Not 1 pound until I went to basic training.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. My younger daughter's that way. She can, and our older daughter resents the dickens out of this because she's more like me. But our younger daughter can just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And I swear it just runs through her. She nothing stays. It doesn't stay in her long enough to absorb anything.
I was on a milk cart. I was a new daughter. And fortunately, my daughter was right home. And I would go eat breakfast, I eat lunch, eat dinner. They even have midnight child that opens up at 10. If I'm asleep, I will wake up. Wait a minute, I will wake up and go get midnight breakfast, go and get right back in bed. And never gain a pound.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's about right. Yep, that's about right. Yep. Well, let's take a short break and then we'll work on chapter 11. 12. Yeah. Okay. So, chapter 12 is about research. We've talked about that to some extent. There are many different levels of research in the healthcare. Some of it is Some of it is for new drugs, obviously, and new devices, new treatments, new diagnostic procedures, but also there's a lot of research on the effectiveness of drugs, the cost effectiveness. There's, yeah, for instance, and sometimes the results are kind of interesting. One of them was a number of years ago, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago. A study was carried out using a method that's called meta-analysis, which basically is to combine many similar kinds of studies into a huge database to analyze some commonalities to the studies. And in this case, it was looking at the whole area, the whole class of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressant drugs, the Prozac and so forth, families. And so they looked at half a dozen drugs and a lot of clinical trials involving 85,000 patients. So the commonality was that they were looking for similar results, relief of depression on the Hamilton Depression Scale. And they were all working by the same mechanism. And so they analyzed all of the patients in the phase 2 clinical trials, in the placebo-controlled trials, and looked at the effect of the drug versus placebo. And what they found was that about 80% of the effect of the drugs was placebo. Well, let me ask a question. That's an interesting response, but let me ask a question. If you take a drug and you get better from your disease, do you care if the drug did it or if it was placebo? You know, that was sort of my response to that was, oh, that's very interesting. And then I thought, but the patients got better. That's right. But they got better. And so who cares? So, but the pharmaceutical industry went bananas. And I thought, God, you guys need some perspective. They got better. Who cares? And it's not like we're giving them placebos knowing that they're going to get better. That's unethical. So what matter does it make? And we know the placebo effect is real anyway. But that was kind of the kind of research that I looked at it, and after I looked at it and I thought, wow, these drugs are not really that worthwhile. And then I stopped myself. I started thinking, but the patients got better. And the patients thought they were going to get better because they were taking a drug and they got better. So who cares whether it was placebo or not? So there, you know, that was one of those things that caused an immediate stir and then disappeared. I think a lot of other people probably had the same realization I did, that it just plain doesn't matter. You know, yes, you spend a lot of money for something that's not going to work, but you get better anyway. So, okay, that's the goal. Now, that works fine in depression. In this one example, it doesn't work in infectious disease. Well, one of the reasons we have a problem with resistant organisms is the overuse of antibiotics. So doctors have known forever that viral diseases are not affected by antibiotics because antibiotics only work on fungal agents and bacteria, and other antibiotics will work on the parasites, okay, the amoebas and so forth. But patients going into a doctor would get mad if they had to pay a doctor and the doctor didn't give them a prescription. So antibiotics became available and doctors started just giving them, knowing perfectly well that it wasn't going to do a thing, but also knowing perfectly well that one of two things was going to happen with this viral infection. Either the patient was going to die real fast or they were going to get better real fast. And so they would take the antibiotic and they would get better. And the problem is then they were selecting for resistant bacteria. And so we created, this was part of creating it's not the whole story, obviously, of creating resistant organisms, but a part of creating the resistant organisms was exactly that. And, I can't blame the doctors. I mean, if your patient's going to get really mad at you because I just wasted my money on you, didn't give me a thing, blah, 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 blah. No, because it isn't going to help you. Doctors are much better about that today than they used to be. But no, it's not going to help you. It's not going to do you the slightest bit of good. So no, you'll get better. If it were ethical to hand people sugar pills and say, yeah, take these, you'll get better in about 3 days. So what would happen? And would have been a lot better. However, but the placebo, and that's not an example of placebo because it's a natural progression of viral infections. So again, we need to be careful about some of the research. The one that I gave you about the antidepressants really was so what? Ultimately, it hasn't affected sales of these things. People still have the same response rate that they did when the study was done. So it has had no effect, and sales have gone up. So, but there's so much research that goes on, and the thing now is that people have access to more information. We used to just rely on what the doctors told us. Now we go out and we find data. A lot of people will do that. It has led to many, many problems for physicians, including the disease of the week phenomenon. When Marcus Welby was a popular TV program, he'd have some exotic disease, and the next week doctors all over the nation would have this disease being presented to them. I think I have blah, blah, blah. I saw it on Dr. Welby. Yeah, right. That was Buddy Ebsen, an actor. Yeah, that was Barnaby Jones. Yeah, yeah. The Beverly Hillbillies. But that's, you have to. This is what happened. People would do that. So now we get every day in the popular media, you'll see a report about something medical, pretty much every day. Every now and again, it's something really useful to know, but for the most part, it's sort of like, okay, you've got another drug that somebody's invented, and maybe 10 years from now, it'll get to the market. Whoopee-doo, or it'll be sensational, like this drug has just been approved, and you know what it's going to cost? $450,000 a year. So with putting that out of context, I'm not defending $450,000 a year. I think that's ridiculous. But how was it calculated? If it's a drug you take, well, they look at the retail price, okay? And then they look at the dosing recommendations, and they make an estimate as to how much a person might take in a year, and that's how they come up with it. Are those numbers accurate? Somewhere along the line, some of them are. I mean, if you're taking a drug like an antidepressant, you're going to take this drug once a day for a year. You know how much it costs. You can pretty much put a number on that that's darned accurate. With a drug like an anti-cancer drug, you don't take it every day for a year. So are we talking about a 3-month course of therapy that's going to cost $450,000? I don't know. I didn't, when I read that report, I couldn't find any information, and quite frankly, I didn't go hunting for it. But it was, really publicized, like this is a big deal, like this is the pharmaceutical industry going nuts, which is a component of it, but is not the only component. So again, since I teach a statistics class here as well, I tend to say, what does that number really mean? And is that the case? If are we talking about a drug that somebody's going to take for 5 years and spend, $2 million? I don't know. I don't have any idea. But nonetheless, these kinds of things are not useful. But then you hear all these medical things. Went to a seminar last summer, and it looked real interesting. It was a seminar on the use of foods as natural cures for disease. Well, that's ancient stuff. That's where we used to get all our cures, was out of the world of animal, vegetable, and mineral. Okay, and we still get some of them out of the world of animal, vegetable, and mineral. But it used to be that was all that was available. So I get in there, and this woman has this string of initials after her name, looking real impressive. And then that raises my suspicions. When I see somebody that has to have 6 different sets of initials after their name, I think, what's going on here? What are you trying to convince me of? But we're through here, and she's talking about foods, and she had some things that I'd heard before. And then she made a statement. She said, you shouldn't eat eggs. 1 egg is like smoking 5 cigarettes a day. At that point, I threw it out, because I cannot. First off, I don't believe that if there is any data that it would support that, and that you can draw that conclusion. People took it seriously, and I thought, well, maybe that'll lower the price of eggs when they don't sell so many of them. Because we eat eggs, and we even eat cookie dough with raw eggs in it. We've been doing that all our lives. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I have noticed. When I was teaching down in Denver, one of the classes I taught, I spent a lecture on nutrition, okay, because it was the only place anybody ever got any nutrition information in our classes. And we talked about the fact that the recommended diet mix has changed repeatedly during my lifetime. And it changes regularly as we learn more, as we discover. I mean, in the 50s, it was, oh, don't eat butter, it's bad for you. Eat oleomargarine. And now we find, oh, well, butter and olive oil are the choices. And now they're saying avocado oil. That's the latest one. So we just eat avocados.
Yeah,
That's right. But we just do that. But, it changes regularly. But the other thing is that, yeah, it goes back and forth. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, we have it. There's just huge amounts of material out there. So, and some of it's absolutely fraudulent. I mean, we've seen, we're somehow or another, we got on some sort of email list. This guy sends out weekly lectures about, the food you eat is killing you. Well, it hasn't done it for 71 years, so wait a minute. Yeah, the foods that some people eat will kill them. When we lived in North Carolina, it was not uncommon to see people come to school and their breakfast was a bag of Cheetos and a Pepsi. I mean, that's going to kill you, you know. But, you know, when our kids went to breakfast, they had, went to school, they'd had a reasonable breakfast, you know. And when I was growing up, we had bacon and eggs or sausage and eggs or ham and eggs or, you know, and grits, lots of grits. Yeah.
So we eat breakfast at home. And then we go to school. You know, Sister Keys and
Yeah.
I said, well, that's gonna be like a little snack. But you know, that's for kids that usually have, but
Yeah. And, you know, it's better than nothing.
yeah,
I think. I'm not, you know, at least the milk part was,
yeah.
you know, but, you know,
Now they say,
yeah, well, that's right. Uh, all of this stuff.
oh,
And we only have whole milk in our house. Yeah. Um, yeah. I drink coffee, and skim milk turns coffee blue. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's a difference. When we were kids, we used to do that, but then we were running around, you know. We grew up on the farm, and you know, we had a neighbor who was a night watchman at the local dairy, and he'd bring us a gallon of whole milk every morning for a quarter. And there's this much cream on top. I mean, we're talking whole, unpasteurized milk that we drank every single day. Yeah. Yeah, the UHT milk. Yeah. 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 Yeah, just sitting on the shelf. Yeah, it's offered throughout Europe. It's beginning to be seen here in the United States. It's not real popular yet, but it's all through Europe. I mean, that's all they sell on the shelves in Europe. It tastes like milk. Yeah. Yeah. It's just flash pasteurized at a high temperature. So, and it works pretty well. So, you know, and people tout a lot of things. So we have a lot of things, you know, the basic science that leads to new drugs. We've got clinical research that, well, the basic science leads to the discovery of potential drugs, devices, et cetera. Clinical research actually tests those drugs and devices to see if they have a benefit to the patient and if they're safe to use. That's the other critical component. Then there's epidemiology. We need to understand the spread and time course of diseases, and finally various health services. And there's lots of those. I mean, there are the screenings and the vaccinations and the health wellness clinics that people conduct and everything else. These are all a lot of time is spent looking at how these services can provide benefit. We have, pardon? Yeah, right. We got all sorts of people that do the basic science. We work at understanding basic biological processes of disease, preferably, and use that as a way of looking for ways to deal with the diseases. The more we understand about disease, the more we understand that the disease is complicated. It used to be kind of viewed as kind of simple, you know. Yeah, you have high blood pressure. You know, you had so we need to get that down. Oh, you have high cholesterol. We need to get that down. Now we find out that maybe that's not such a good idea. That cholesterol isn't bad. Yeah. Some people just, some's genetics. We had a friend in North Carolina. Joan was about this big around, right? And taller than me. She was black belt in karate. She was a marathon runner. She was a vegan. She had a cholesterol above 300. I am serious. Above 300. They put her on statins. Yeah, they put her on cholesterol lowering drugs. They just made her sick. She stopped taking them, and they had no effect on her cholesterol because it was genetic. That was her normal. That was her normal. She is
But if somebody,
she's a year older than me. She's still kicking, I'm told. That's her norm. And I had a boss whose cholesterol was 350. And I mean, he was slim. I mean, he wasn't as pencil thin like our friend Joan, but he was a slim man. He exercised, he golfed, and you know, I suppose that's exercise since he rode around on the golf course on a golf cart. But at least he was swinging his arm. But anyway, but and he ate Popeye's fried chicken all the time, and yeah, all that stuff. And he had no heart disease. He had high cholesterol. The drugs didn't work on him. Well, we need cholesterol. I mean, obviously, our cell walls are made of cholesterol and long chain fatty acids. Those are the things that are stored as the triglycerides on your blood work. So we need those to form cell walls. That's why pregnant women cannot take cholesterol lowering drugs. It'll kill their baby. All of those drugs have a pregnancy category X. Every single one. Because you need that to build cells. So, and quite frankly, the body manufactures most of what it needs. We don't need to eat it. So the idea was that, oh, well, your cholesterol is up, so this is causing strokes and heart attacks and all this other stuff. Now we're finding that maybe that's not quite as simple an explanation. That what the real explanation is probably inflammation, which can be dietarily induced. Okay.
Inflammation, dietarily induced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
The foods we eat can cause inflammation. Our stress levels cause inflammation. Lack of sleep causes inflammation. It adds up. So we are learning a lot. And the more we learn, I think the more we understand what we don't know, just how much we don't know. But the basic science research really gives us lots of clues. We begin to understand the molecular basis of various diseases. Experiments on infectious organisms like viruses and bacteria. The more we understand these organisms, the more the better our chance of developing agents that can deal with them more efficiently. But we have those. And this leads then to clinical advances in that we understand more about the disease and we learn more about how to treat. Then clinical research, we've talked about that. We have to show clinically that a drug is safe first. That's number one. And effective. So those are the only two. Well, they're well, it depends on what you want to call them. There's what we call the preclinical research, which is the rationale that we put together of animal studies and enzymatic studies and both in vitro and in vivo studies to put a rationale that a drug might be able to affect a disease. Then we file what we call an IND, an investigational new drug application. And what this is the justification and all of the information that we've accumulated about safety in animals and about efficacy in animal or other models of disease. And then and we also disclose the preliminaries of how we're going to actually manufacture the drug for clinical trials. Because the FDA is responsible for safe manufacturing practices as well. So that we can't use dangerous materials in our drugs. We can't have a risk of that. So what happens next is we start our phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials are safety. They're in people that are otherwise, that are healthy. We call them normal volunteers, or healthy volunteers. And all we're doing is giving doses and then going through a sequence of increasing the doses gradually until something happens. And the something that usually happens is going to be some parameter changed in blood work, like liver enzyme induction, indicating that the liver is being stressed. That's considered that, and that's where we stop. And it could be other. It could be something indicating kidneys being stressed or anything else. It could also be, and it has on occasions, then a very serious reaction. And at that point, it stopped. Depending on what that thing happening is, we may or may not be able to go on to the next phase of investigation, because we've established that, hopefully we've established that we can give a dose that's far above the expected therapeutic dose safely. Because what we want is what we call a very broad therapeutic window, meaning that the drug is safe up to many times the anticipated clinical dose. So then we go into our phase 2 trials, which are generally double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, in which we are looking first at safety, again, always monitoring safety. But now we're looking to see, we're usually with people with some level of the disease we're treating. I have some experience with the development of a drug for lowering cholesterol. And we went into patients that had moderate elevations of cholesterol because we were trying to avoid those genetic causes that would make drugs ineffective, or apparently ineffective. So we wanted to look at that population. So you go into a patient population, preferably a population that has very little in the way of other disease processes going on, because you don't want anything confusing the results. These are double blind, meaning neither the patient nor the doctor running an individual site clinical trial knows. Means nobody knows. The patient can't say, well, doc, did I get the drug or not? He's going to say, I have no idea. All I have is a sample with a number on it, and you got it. Pardon? Yeah. They are. If they're done well, they can be very, very rigorous. In fact, if they're done properly, no one in the sponsoring company and no one actually conducting the clinical trials knows who's getting what, if they're properly done. So then we determine efficacy. And along the way, we are busily determining two other things, which is what is going to be the effective dose? Can we confirm that our animal studies are giving us a good example of an effective dose? And the other is the schedule. How often do we have to give it? We do all this by doing a lot of blood work. Okay. Then there is the next phase after that is phase 3, which is very broad usage. This is going to be in patient populations that come closer to mimicking real life. There are still inclusion criteria. It's not come one, come all. We still will take a narrow slice of patients for this, because again, we're looking for safety issues, but we want to show that on wide usage, we can maintain the parameters of efficacy and safety. At that point, when we finish with that, we then go and submit our new drug application to the FDA, and we start then running a series of studies that are called a number of different things. Some of them are called post-marketing studies. Some of them are called phase 4 studies. Sometimes they're a continuation, especially if it's a chronic drug like an antidepressant or a cholesterol drug. It may be a continuation of our last trial. where we'll keep on observing the patients. But that's the fifth stage. And patients are monitored for years with these drugs. So in that, we have all sorts of people involved. The controlled clinical trial is a model. Is it a perfect model? No, because we find out after the drug gets into broad usage, and that's where, when it's marketed, that's when it's sort of like come one, come all. And so you have people coming in who have 4 or 5 underlying diseases. You'll have people coming in who are already taking half a dozen or more different medications. And so now life gets more complicated because, of course, there's interactions between drugs. And the more drugs, the more interactions. So it's a very difficult kind of things. There are all sorts of safeguards to that research. Patients volunteer to be a part, which means they sign a consent form, a waiver form. Basically says they understand the risks. They understand that they may have an adverse reaction. They understand that they may be getting placebo instead of drug. They understand that they may or may not actually get better. There's some risk that they'll have a bad reaction. So they sign all these forms. If the informed consent is acceptable to the institution where the trials are being held, then we could go forward. All of our experimental protocols are looked over. They're held at clinical research sites. These are sites that are set up to handle these kinds of clinical research sites. They have what they call an institutional review board at the site, which looks at all the protocols, makes sure that they are within all of the ethical guidelines, and that the kind of research is something that they're comfortable with in their institution. They might not be in some cases. But they want to be sure that patients, first is that the patients are protected. And that there are safeguards in place from a record-keeping standpoint. They look at all the case report forms. All of this stuff is taken into account. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the average time for a drug, if you were in the pharmaceutical industry and looking at how long it's going to take for a drug to get through clinical trials and potentially get on the market, you can divide it into a couple of different things. You look at the kind of drug. I'll give you an example. When the company I was working for was developing the first drug to treat AIDS, which was AZT, Retrovirr, we were simultaneously trying to get approval for Wellbutrin, the first of the atypical antidepressants. Wellbutrin took 12 years, and it took a major battle to get it approved because the head of the psychopharmaceutical group at the FDA had basically said he was never going to allow another antidepressant to be approved. There were too many of them on the market. Well, that wasn't his decision to make. I can sympathize with that, but it wasn't his decision to make. The only requirement, there's nothing in the FDA rules that say, well, if there's a lot of drugs on the market, we won't, not going to happen. So on the other hand, AZT took about 3 because it was a breakthrough drug for a disease that was scaring the hell out of people and for which there was no cure. And this offered hope. So 3 years. So AZT took 3 years to get approved. Yeah, that was for AIDS, the AIDS drug. Yeah, the first drug to treat AIDS. So it was approved in almost record time. So the issue there was that it depends, how long it takes depends on the class of drugs. A drug that needs to be that is treating a disease for which there is no cure and no hope is going to go through a lot faster than something like an antidepressant for which there are lots of alternatives. Yes, lots of yeah, even, especially non-drug, as well. But lots of drug, lots of alternatives. Pardon? Yeah, I bet. But the issue is that it can take 12 to 15 years for a very complex drug. Now, some of the new drugs coming out, some of the cancer drugs that are coming out for small populations, get done a lot faster because the clinical trials, since they're very small populations of patients, the clinical trials are therefore shorter. Okay, so another form of research, of course, is epidemiology, which is looking at the reasons diseases spread. And this could be characteristics of the disease itself, the vector, the people, the behaviors of people that might lead to disease, environments, environmental causes, just all the different characteristics that could be related to a disease. And in that case, most of these are, descriptive studies. They're summaries of huge databases. So we look at epidemiology. We think about epidemiology in relation to things like the flu and infectious disease, but epidemiology also is useful in studying things like heart disease. Heart disease is not contagious, not in any way that we understand. It may be genetic, or there may be a genetic component. It may be a heritable disease in the geneticist's lexicon. But just because, it's partly genetics, it's also lifestyle. So we're looking at what are the relationships between disease and, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But borderline diabetic, it's just life. It's just, and someone say, oh, you need to watch this, you need to watch it, because that runs in our family. So it's like, well, and it's not going to run along. And
Yep.
it just,
Yeah.
they will go 99 miles to find something that would, they would go take all these drugs, but they will never exercise. They won't leave that hormone. It's just stuff,
Mm-hmm.
It's something else going to somewhere else with this, and that's totally I hate for that.
Well, it happens to all of us. But yeah, there are some things that are clearly related. But I was going to say, my naturopath likes to say, those genes don't have to express. Yep. You can rewrite your genetics. You can by using a lot of different things. And on top of that, there are things that clearly run in families. Colon cancer runs in my wife's family. Yeah. Her mother, can't remember when. Now it's been a long time, but had several feet of colon taken out of her because she had an advanced precancerous polyp on a colonoscopy. So they just took out some colon. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And sometimes that happens. But in her case, I mean, she's been kicking for at least 30 years since then. So, you know, but my mother-in-law's father died of colon cancer. And as far as we know, it runs extensively in the family. And, but my wife has said, well, no, I mean, we watch, you know, she does get colonoscopies. You know, so we keep an eye on that because it's easy to detect. Mm.
And the friend is the one that had colon cancer. My mom's sister died of colon cancer in 2005. There's 7 of us kids, and not one of them was getting friend. Not one. So when Frances found out when she found out she had colon cancer, I think she just went to the doctor because she had that pylori.
Mm-hmm.
And when she went to the doctor, they could have been a good thing, you know.
Yeah, could
and
have been.
So it was pretty scary. You know, and I had a cousin, Robert, who I was telling you about. He had colon cancer. You know, so I hurried up and got mine started. 2016 when I was
Yeah.
no, I was 52. Yeah, 52.
Okay.
No problem, no nothing. But it's lifestyle and environment and the information is there. Did they miss it? No. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody thinks that that's a difficult
Invisible.
process, but I
It's
mean,
not.
it's
The
not.
practice
I
of
mean,
the-
they knock you out. So you lose a day because, you know, they knock you out and you're kind of for a while.
The difficult part is the practice.
Yeah.
And I'm home.
Yeah. And you've been drinking that crappy liquid.
I know. It's like, oh.
Yep.
Oh, and I told the nurse,
Yeah. Don't eat too fast. But yeah. And so again, you know, so that means, you know, given the family history and my wife's first colonoscopy, there was a polyp. And so she had to go back in 5 years. It was another one. She was pissed off about that. Have to go back in 5 years. But it's made us look at our daughters and say, well, you know, at about 40, you should probably get screened.
Yeah.
You should start screening now
Yeah.
because we do have this issue in the family. Fortunately, not on my side of the family that we know of.
Well, you know, when the doctor asked me if the friends in my family, no one in my immediate family had. And that's what they look at because before I came here in the hospital, when I back home, I told myself I have it. It's not immediate family. I have an aunt that had it, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, I get something in the mail. They're going to schedule me for a colonoscopy, blah, blah, blah. This was when I was like 44, 45 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they had me, they say, go find a clinic. That's like, something told me to call Aetna. So I called Aetna. I told them that I had, you know, colon cancer runs in my family, and they scheduled me for all these procedures. They say, is it immediate family or, you know, relatives? I say, relatives. We're not paying for it.
And there's part of the problem. They should, because if you turned out to have colon cancer, even if you had a short time to live, it would be a lot more expensive than that screening. You know, it's really stupid. The insurance companies are too short term. We used to maneuver the insurance companies all the time. So anyway, the epidemiology studies really are looking at patient records. Now we've added a genetic component to that because we are seeing that many diseases seem to cluster in families. Yes. And well, they know people. They're in families of people. You know, we see that. There's a lot of genetic research that's showing more and more of that, especially research that is carried out looking at susceptibility to things like depression and so forth, seem definitely to cluster into families. So that you will have, you know, it's like I say, my wife's family has colon cancer, my family does not. So that's clustered onto one side, which means that our daughters need to be vigilant. So it's the issue about epidemiology, since you're really gathering retrospective data, is that it's fairly quick. Clinical trials take a long time. Epidemiological research can be much quicker. And it's a lot cheaper than any other kind of research. Yeah, because it just is just people's time. They're all gathering up data, analyzing it, but that's just time. That's just paying people. You're not buying expensive chemicals. You're not going through regulatory issues. So it's relatively inexpensive and often can suggest further studies. We can use sort of prospective studies. And in fact, hi there. Hello, Kristen. How are you? Is this someone we're supposed to know? Hi, how are you? Good. Looks like it. Trying to hide under a coat. Oh. Oh ho. Boy, you got lucky. Ah. Yeah. So it's always easy to share. Okay. Pardon?
The boys.
Yep. So we can also do prospective studies, and in fact, the most famous being the Framingham Heart Study. Prospective studies really watch populations to see what happens over time. Yeah, that's part of epidemiology. It's an ongoing. So you know, so the purpose is to collect data and periodically go through it and analyze it and see what associations may be there. You know, obviously, you know, smokers versus non-smokers to look at the potential for lung cancer. This is how we've demonstrated that.
When I was in they are so heavy smoke. They smoke like
Yeah, they do.
But they don't have the diseases.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, well, it might be kimchi. Might be. Maybe that's why I like kimchi. But yeah, it could be a part of it. But they do. They smoke like chimneys. So do the Japanese.
Oh, really?
Oh God. Yes. You know, you walk into a meeting in Japan and you feel like you've just smoked a pack of cigarettes when you come out. I mean, ugh, it's awful. But these, but you know, we do these studies and we really look at segmenting into smokers and non-smokers, and then look at the diseases they have. They all get diseases. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a form of lung cancer that's called non-smokers lung cancer or non-small cell lung cancer. Yeah, there are people. There are people. We had a dean down in Denver who died of that disease. Greg never smoked in his life. Could be or genetic.
You know, he used to be a medical. I think he was in our class. Oh, but he was saying that they found the link to lung cancer.
A lot of it is,
Oh,
but smoking does contribute.
yeah.
There is that correlation
Right.
exists.
Right.
The effect of genetics is additive, probably.
Okay.
Makes it makes you more likely. I mean, what we see is genetics can make you more susceptible. Yeah, there are people that are, 101 and still smoking.
Bubble.
Yeah, 101 and smoking, and you don't, they don't have cancer. So it's just, again, it's genetics. So there is, and then they talk about experimental epidemiology. Yeah, there are a lot of problems with that. Yeah, because you've got ethical issues, possibility of withholding treatment in order to observe what happens in an epidemiological study. It's difficult, really, to do that in a way that is justifiable. There are a lot of other ways. There are other ways you can get to some of that material. So we have and then there's health services research, which is the cost utilization, effectiveness, efficacy, efficiency. How do you get the best outcomes for these conditions? And we do know that here we're not looking. We're looking at now the total programs that are we getting a return on the investment is part of it. Some of it's economic. Some of it is studying, just what is it costing in terms of people, time, improvements of therapy. What are they? How are they driving medicine, and how are they making? How are they improving by delivering services, outcomes? So there's lots of ways of doing that. They have certain departments that will do this. We have we monitor treatment programs for effectiveness. We take a look at cross study analysis, the meta analysis I was talking about with the SSRIs. There's a lot of research that's done looking at ways of looking at the effectiveness of our medical system. It used to be that back surgery was common. It's really reduced because it was found to be ineffective. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think for the right patient, they could be very effective. But again, it's going to be choosing the patient. There are other means of dealing with with backs. I mean, in some cases, surgery is the only answer. I mean, but the problem is, and what we found is, especially fusion, spinal fusion surgery. Well, okay, so you fuse a couple of your spinal, you know, your spinal processes, you fuse them together. And then what happens is above and below you get other breaks. So all you've done, you haven't really dealt with whatever the problem is. And, you know, part of it has to do, again, with exercise. We need to have people using their backs, strengthening their backs, the musculature to support the bones, a proper diet to maintain, and an understanding that, you know what, as we get older, we lose the cartilage, we start compressing things, and back problems are an issue. My wife, as a physical therapist, has taught me lots of ways to, when I feel a back problem coming on, to fix it. And I do. I used to be once a year flat on my back for a week. Sometimes it would be, you know, something, you know, obviously that caused a problem. Like one time I slid into second base playing softball, and I didn't get up for a week. I managed to get home and get into bed, and that was it. And another time, I was leaning over the breakfast table, helping my daughter with a little bit of a problem, a math problem she was having. And when I stood up, I felt my back because I used my back to pull me up. I didn't use my legs.
The door was too close to the window, so I couldn't really, so I reached over like that, and I got that, oh.
Hurt. Pulled a muscle.
I pulled the muscle. And
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I mean,
Yeah.
And it was so, I did not, I used to keep a thing of a lady. I said, I'm not taking yoga, whatever. And like, that was like about a month ago.
Yeah, okay. Now it's there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it can hurt like crazy. And heat is good.
Yeah.
I will take sometimes an ibuprofen just to take the edge off the pain so I can relax. Because the more it hurts, the more you tighten up.
Yeah. It was something with your liver.
Creatinine? Yeah.
Was kind of like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing.
So. Yeah. Water's surprisingly therapeutic. We don't drink enough in our society. Yeah. Yeah, we have when visitors visit us from sea level, we have them force water because they're not used to it. Yeah. Can't blame you. Can't blame you. So there's lots of research going on in a variety of areas in terms of healthcare utilization, in terms of improving the quality of varying procedures and treatment methodologies. We're looking at and improving that thing, trying to understanding that quality has meaning in medicine. Okay, the there's lots of theoretical stuff that goes on, but in reality, your outcome is based on patient results. Okay, so we look at quality. There's a lot of information about quality improvement and research in healthcare. A lot of the research in healthcare is today is looking at new approaches to improving quality. But one of the biggest changes has been an emphasis on evidence-based medicine instead of just taking, using sort of logical inferential reasoning now, and doctors making their best guess about what's going on with a patient. They're really encouraged now to really gather information and use that information to systematically look at the patient and make a diagnosis based on that. And one of the biggest problems is doctors don't have enough time with their patients. And if they have to make up their mind in a hurry, they're going to make up their mind and then say, well, here, try this and let me know, come back in a month or a week or whatever, and then we'll see if this is working. Well, why do you think it's going to work? Where's the evidence? Yeah. And now we really want more evidence-based approaches, meaning let's ask ourselves why we think you ought to take this drug. Some things are pretty obvious. You have a strep infection, you're going to take a drug for that. You're also going to get better in 3 days. Yeah. Whereas other things, one of the most intractable, of course, is any disease that the symptomology is pain, because we have no objective measure of pain. So it's very hard to have a pain scale. All you can do is ask the patient how bad it hurts. Well, yeah, and there are some people that a stubbed toe is going to be a 5. Really, literally. And other people that you can practically chop their hand off and they'll say, oh, yeah, 2 or a 3, And they have this pain scale, 1 to 10. And doctors used to be really stupid about this, and so did nurses, actually. But people would say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no pain and 10 being the worst imaginable, where's your pain? Well, you're going to have some people that, again, the stubbed toe is going to be an 8 or 9, and other people will be sitting there saying, well, I guess the worst pain I can possibly imagine is somebody trying to saw my arm off with a butter knife. So, this may be a 3. So my wife used to say, the worst you've ever felt, versus no pain, where 10 is the worst pain you've ever felt. That very commonly comes out of women. Yes. Monitor the baby. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And part of the reason that we're looking at evidence-based medicine is that there is evidence that many clinical decisions are not actually based on evidence. They're based on feelings. They're based on past experience. Yeah. They're based on and it wasn't it? And they're based on not having enough information, because there's way too much information. Doctors have a very difficult time staying current. Yeah, there's so much information. So and evidence-based approaches inherently, at least there's our logic thinking again, but evidence-based approaches inherently should have a cleaner outcome and be more cost effective, because you have a reason other than, well, this looks something like I saw a month and a half ago with Joe. So maybe you have the same thing, so we'll try that. It doesn't work, so you have to come back. This just adds cost.
Yeah.
So evidence-based medicine is actually a big topic today, and quality improvement in general. And that is quality improvement goes up and down the medical scale. Quality of care, quality of testing, quality of the products themselves. The evidence approach looks at data, looks at data largely from the large randomized clinical trials that are done. The problem is, of course, this means that they're drug-based more than anything else. So the other potential sources, outcomes research involving insurance records using large files, are considered not good evidence-based medicine. Only usable as historical. As it says here, outcomes research using claims data is excellent to find out what doctors are doing, but terrible to find out what they should be doing. That's probably a bit hyperbolic as a statement, but there's a lot of truth in it. Because claims data are based on decisions and self-reinforcing because they're based on decisions that are made in the absence of evidence. So we really are looking a lot at what's happening with the outcomes of treatments. Are they working? Are they working? There's lots of other things. This is one of the reasons that we have the functional medicine movement is, they're accumulating data now on the value of these things. And some of them are squishy. Meditation is looked at as kind of woo-woo by a lot of doctors. And yet meditation is something that is millennia old and has worked. So we have a lot of resistance. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so there's a section here on research ethics, and right now there's a lot of research going on in a lot of areas, but the major research is on treatment of disease. So remedial instead of preventive, because prevention doesn't make people money, to be honest.
That's true.
When obviously prevention is going to be better, is going to be better for the population as a whole. However, we're starting to see people understand that. There's also the issue of conflict of interest has always been an issue in medicine. We more and more will see people making presentations at meetings, and at the end of the presentation, they will list all of their affiliations with various pharmaceutical and medical device research companies. There's a worry that the funding of all of a lot of the pharmaceutical, I used to do this when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I gave away a lot of money to research institutions so that we would have first access to the results, with the idea that we would be able to license and exploit them. If you, depending on how the academic institution is set up, It's easy to see, it's easy to be suspicious that if I gave, say Duke University Medical School $5 million to research a topic, it's easy to see that it would be tempting to bias the end results at the end. Now, fortunately, most academic scientists are not going to do that. But it is, yeah, there's that integrity issue. But there is always the appearance. And when you have an academic researcher who is really pushing the use of specific kinds of approaches, drugs or whatever, to treat disease, and then you find out that his funding came from GlaxoSmithKline and it's their product, your suspicions are going, they're going to go sky high. Plus, there is the issue of looking at not reporting all the data. There's always a suspicion that clinical trial data will not be reported if it's negative. Yeah. There are examples of that. Negative data just don't get reported. They never get written up. Okay. And then there's the issue of companies that write reports themselves and then have some high mucky muck put his name on them, ghostwriting them. Fortunately, these are not things that happen a lot, but they are. The issue of conflict of interest is always a concern in the medical field. There are lots of challenges. One of them is some of the challenges are, how do we try to make the delivery of healthcare more cost effective? Because we're spending way too much money and we're not getting the results we need. So how do we manage to do that? We've got all sorts of research now in genomics, in the human genome, that are turning up genes that are somehow correlated to certain diseases. And that correlation may or may not involve causation. And then what do we do with that information? If we have the testing done, if someone can test you and look to see, as a woman, just say you have the BRCA1 gene, you have a statistical increase in the possibility of breast cancer. What does someone do with that information? You, as a woman, are going to say, I'm going to do regular breast exams. I'm going to watch this disease. And if something happens, I will make the decision that could range anywhere from, oh, not a problem, to radical mastectomy. But you should be the one who makes that decision rather than some insurance actuary saying, well, we can't insure you because you might develop breast cancer one day. You might not, and then, then they've got your money and they haven't spent anything, right? So there's a lot of things. We've got a lot of advances in that. We're looking at ways of prolonging human life. We can keep the body going long after the mind is empty. When my sister was dying and they had her on life support and there was no brain activity, I was talking to her daughter and I said, what's going on with my sister's soul? What's going on with your mother's soul? And she said, yeah, that's my worry. And then, I don't know if it's fortunate or not, but then she went ahead and passed. Her body shut down 2 days later. So that question sort of got answered, I guess. But that was a concern. You can keep the body alive, but what? Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, let me out of here. Exactly. Just all right already. Turn the bloody thing off. Yeah. So, and what about the quality of that life that's being prolonged? My sister had no quality of life on a life support machine.
Semi-state cleaner. My husband took care of her.
Yeah.
I put her in a nursing home, but it was not 19 years. We took care of her, had home health,
Yeah.
family just came. But she was given, my mom was a nurse coming to the hospital. She was in the hospital looking to diabetic. Something was going on with her. It wasn't, she was sitting up in there talking to my mom. Oh, I'm so glad I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna get out here and same time nurse put something in my IV. And just in my sick room in front of my mom.
Your mother should have said, "What did you give her?"
Oh, it was a lawsuit. It was
Yeah.
like $8 million,
Oh.
$7 million, that stuff. It was just, and we go by her house, like I said, her husband took care of her. And
Mhm.
her eyes, sometimes her eyes would be open,
Yeah.
and we just talked to her, but the agony. And I'm very sensitive to hear every word everybody was saying
Yeah.
and not able to.
Not able to respond. Yeah.
And just,
That's got to be tough on everybody. Yep. So it's time for us to quit. So we'll do that on Wednesday before we do the final. And we'll take a quick look at the future of healthcare, since that's really